You're sort of creating startups inside the enterprise.
Inside
it's a very fluid approach to organizational structure, because you're also running another council too, right?
Right.
Which one is that?
I run a council that's called the Connected Architecture Council, which ensures that architectures are consistent across the company. And I'm responsible for, Cisco as a company is pursuing what we call 30 adjacencies, right? So you can say, wow, how can you as a company have 30 priorities? Most only have one, maybe two. But the reason we do that is we treat of these 30 opportunities as a portfolio, right? And I'm responsible to come up with the metrics and the process to measure those.
To measure all 30.
Measure all
That's
30.
part of your CTO
role.
Exactly.
So it's sort of a portfolio of bets that we are making, right? And some tend to be very long cycle opportunities like putting routers in space. How do you get routing capability in a satellite, right? Which is a very long cycle. You have to wait for the next satellite to go up. Very complex technical problem. The other could be growing our business in Russia. Very different kind of an opportunity. So there can be this plethora of opportunities, but we treat all of those as if a venture capital would treat their investment.
One of the things I asked Padma yesterday when we were talking about this session was, you know, this structure that Cisco has is so, you know, really kind of is like surfing. You know, it's really not a very stable structure by traditional corporate terms. And I was just noting that there's a surprisingly large number of women in senior roles at Cisco. I mean, we went through them. It's amazing. You know, Becky, who's the CIO, and Padma, who's the CTO, and you have the chief marketing officer is a woman, and the one other.
Chief marketing officer, head of Cisco Capital is a woman, the head of our communications is a woman, the head of central engineering is a woman. So yeah, we do have.
Yeah, I mean, you don't find many companies where that would be true. Can I just ask you again, is there any connection? Did you give any thought to that?
I know you asked me that yesterday, and I'm afraid to say yes or no. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's a company that allows you to be very fluid. I think the reason I like it is that for one day, I may be focused on our small business strategy, right? We're a company, many people think of us as making very expensive kinds of equipment, and a small business looks for a more cost-effective solution. But we actually sell quite a bit into the small business segment. We just have a different brand approach and a different way that we build products there. So one minute I'm working on that, and the next minute I'm thinking about cloud computing. What does that mean for security? How can we enable networking, which is a very technically challenging topic. And I think it intellectually is very stimulating to be able to go back and forth between those.
So Prasad, you know, you guys have more recently had your near-death experience, if I might say. Although you guys came less close to it than some of your industry colleagues, clearly. But, you know, you're kind of working your way out, you know, from a different place than Cisco, obviously. But does any of this does it resonate, the structural stuff? And given that you are, in your role, thinking about turning the vehicle into a completely different kind of product, in effect, that has far greater ramifications for the customer than just taking them from here to there. How does it change the way, you know, your company that bends metal, as is your history, how does it change your organization?
So let me sort of use Techonomy and sort of look at a Techonomic architecture of what Ford is all about. And so you can have layers if you feel comfortable with a layered approach to architecture, and say, there are clock speeds that are distinctly different, to borrow from Charlie Fine at MIT, for each of these layers. So bending steel, moving steel around is one clock speed. It doesn't change every Christmas. It sort of has a slightly longer lead time. Above that are the things that perhaps are less rigid, less firm, and that includes a lot of the electronics piece that moves at Moore's law or related paces, and so faster speed. Then comes all the software that needs to make something happen and useful. You could argue about the specific numbers, about over 90% of the features, if you were to go into a dealership to buy a car today, about 90% of them would be one way or the other determined by the behavior of electrons that are controlled by software. And so it's really, at the end of the day, software that determines the functionality. And so it's really a functional approach to how we're looking at everything. And then on top of that, the fastest moving gear are things that are happening out in the cloud. And whether it's a smart cloud or whether it's services being beamed in, or consumers bringing in their devices and saying, how come this doesn't work with my car, or the built-in stuff itself, all these have to now play. So organizationally, the Techonomic architecture has its own distinct value. There's the steel clock speed, there's the electronics clock speed, there's software, and there's services, these four layers coming together, and really creating organizational changes that need to respond to this. So from a Ford standpoint, we've reconstituted the Technology Advisory Board, working with the CTO and CEO. And so that now looks at the world in terms of these layers, in terms of saying, how do we make sure that there's compatibility between these layers? So one doesn't hold the other back.
I mean, when you go to a management meeting and you're talking to your peers at other parts of the company who are in the bending metal business about some of this stuff, do they like, does their jaw drop? Do they say, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, how do you communicate?
Well, it's a really interesting experience because a lot of them do relate to this in their own personal experiences, in their life experiences, whether it's themselves or their children or their family, who are really bringing in electronics and bringing in toys so they can experience that in their daily lives. But to really put it into the perspective and context of the automobile has taken some shifts in the tectonic plates. And those are happening, and those are, obviously, there's pressures that result from that, but there's been a good easing of those pressures, and I think it's been a really good, remarkable coming together, just as demonstrated by our numbers and the acceptance of our products over the last year and a half and two. I think it's
well, I think that's a great question, and it's never easy, right? I think people in Cisco still, I think we've been in this evolution of changing the organization for 7 years, and it's a big shift. And I think there are people who've been very successful at building the core business for the last 10 years who are threatened by some of the changes that are going on. And so absolutely, if you go to them and say, hey, look, now you have to understand the whole healthcare industry, and to develop telehealth solutions, you have to kind of have somebody who's a doctor. I mean, we have doctors working in Cisco now that come tell engineers who think they know everything, and I'm one, by the way.
You're a medical doctor?
No, I'm an engineer. I mean, engineers always think they know everything, right? But now it's
I know you're an impressive person, but you know.
But it's a very different change. Yeah, so people are threatened by some of these changes, especially because you can't exactly predict where the industry is going.
Yeah. So, finally, a question. But Jody, yeah, and then I've got a question that I want to ask both of you to wrap up, because we're unfortunately going to have to do that soon.
Jody Westby, Global Cyber Risk. So I'm interested about Ford. They brought in, when Bill Ford moved over and brought in the new executive, I think it was from General Dynamics.
Boeing?
Boeing Aerospace Defense, which is a company that is quite different from the automobile manufacturing. And how much of that has played into or helped you envision some of these radical ideas about how cars would become platforms?
Yeah, so let me I'll make one remark and then add the platform piece to it. One striking piece was when you fly across the globe, do you really need a distinctly different Boeing 747 in Europe than one from out here? And so it's really commonization of underbody platforms. The physical hardware platforms was the very first step. And so we reduced the number of platforms, increased the number of top hats, as we call them, that sit on top of these platforms so we could get cost efficiencies right off the bat. So that was step one. As you did that, we wanted to now distinguish ourselves. So getting quality done right, getting cost down, nailed down, those are the fundamentals, and those are sort of the entry points into the game, if you will. But then how do you stand out, and how do you make sure that you're different from somebody else? Not in our eyes, but in the eyes of the consumers and the eyes of those who then advise consumers. I think that's where creating the automobile as a platform that embraces the information age and turns the gears of the information age to work at 70 miles an hour or at driving speeds became a real pursuit that we all embraced collectively.
Okay, back there real quick.
So Stephen Sprague of Wave Systems. So my question is really actually probably for both, which is, as we look at the car as a platform that's become sort of a 2-ton mobile phone, the interesting aspect is the security, the cloud, the services, the trusted execution in your car, because if I download the wrong software and I get a virus and my car doesn't start in the morning, the consumer is going to be very annoyed. I'd love to just hear a little bit more of a comment as to how do I help protect the personalized information as all of a sudden my mother's doing fleet management of my car, which is driving around and where's my GPS location all the time. There's some very interesting challenges of privacy, security, data security. If I lose my car and it has all my data in it, what happens?
Real quick, yeah.
So very quickly, we use the acronym SPURS: security, privacy, usability, reliability, and safety. And all of that is absolutely important. We're working on those, really from the standpoint of solving the last inch. How does the driver use it and consume it and respond to it?
I have a question for both of you before we go. I wrote this book about Facebook, which we gave some copies out earlier, and we're going to have some more out there tomorrow, I think. One reason I did is I really do think this social networking thing is a landscape-altering phenomenon to almost everything. This connectivity between individuals that's occurring. And I know this is a particular interest of yours, Prasad. And it's also been a big thing for you at Cisco. So I just, if you quickly both talk about how social networking as a landscape element is changing the way your companies have to think. Can you start, Prasad?
Well, let me use the automobile as an example, and let's use the stop sign as a metaphor. Every stop sign speaks. It's just that we don't hear it. We haven't matched data up to make that happen. So if a stop sign could tell you that this is where history has really had some bad news for us, and we would perhaps take that stop sign more seriously. And we'd drive Education 2.0 along with our whole experience of getting to have better driving.
In other words, your car might tell you when you're coming to a stop sign. Like there's this one really weird flashing stop sign down in the village.
That's right. I've taken
Maybe there's been a bunch of accidents there. That's in a crude way of what you're talking about.
Right.
I think from my point of view, I think social networking, the reason that it's very popular, and I think it'll continue to be a platform for the future, it kind of brings together people with like-minded interests, right? Wherever they are. I think the reason that Facebook is so powerful is that allows us to connect on various topics. As a company, we are focused on how do you make that productive in an enterprise? How can you connect experts? And we are developing with security, right? If you want to extend enterprise applications onto a mobile platform, whether it's a mobile device, tablet, whatever it is, and eventually into a moving mobile, a moving platform that's moving at a faster speed, then you do need to combine security, policy, location. You kind of have to bring all those three things together with authentication. And I think that's something we are focused on doing. And I think the point that you are making, I think, Prasad, what you're making is this machine-to-machine networking is going to be the next evolution of it. Not just people-to-people connectivity, but machine-to-machine communication. And that's going to make our lives even harder because think of all the security implications there, right? But that's where we think the network actually can play a very relevant role in that.
There's a lot of companies, including Facebook, HP, Google, et cetera, that are really specifically strategizing for that environment. So, okay, we've got to wrap.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One of the reasons, I just think these two are two of the smartest people I know, so I just like to have them up here.
Great.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.